Thank you for coming. Thank you that not all of you decided to skip town on spring break, and so good to see all of you. I hope the worship touched your heart. You are good. Isn't that fantastic? What I want to do this morning, because this is Holy Week, what we refer to as Holy Week, I know this is Palm Sunday, won't be talking particularly about that, but what I want to take us to is this idea of what is actually happening in this story. So let me just read to you two parts of two verses. They're really short, but listen to this. In him was life. My purpose, just as Jesus talking, my purpose is to give them life. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much for this time together, and I just thank you for your word, and I just thank you for this story, this amazing, amazing story that you invited us to be part of. So just as we think together and as we hear together from you this morning, pray that our hearts would be filled with in a new appreciation for who you are and what you've done on our behalf. In Jesus' name, amen. So to set up our talk this morning, I want you to look at this picture, and even as I've showed you this picture, I'm going to be saying things about it, but you put your words into it, how you would think about this. So here's the picture. Now here's what I want you to think about. If that's the answer, and however you want to say it in your own heart how you want to say it. But if that was the answer, what was the question? Have you thought about that? Like, that's it? If that is the cure, then what disease was there? I mean, if that's it, that's it? What was going on that it came to that? Or maybe you could say it this way. If that was the solution, what at the end of the day was the problem? And if you think about it that way, then the question is simply this: what problem did Jesus come to solve? So to kind of chase into this is in some ways, well, before I get into that, let me just say this. I think particularly the death and resurrection were designed to answer some questions about what was going on earth and what was happening in the world that God created, and what we as people were facing, what was going on, the death and the resurrection of Jesus. So this Sunday we're going to look at the death part, next Sunday at the resurrection part. But it was particularly designed, maybe it was particularly, you could say this, targeted to deal with something in particular. And it came to that. So to kind of chase this down, I want to take us back to Genesis 2, and then we're going to go to Genesis 3 just real quickly. I'm going to call this Christianity 101, just because it's so basic. I'm not going to so much teach you anything new or I just want us to stop and say, that was for me? What was going on here that it needed that? So let's go to Genesis 2. In Genesis 2, you have this, you remember, those of you who know your Old Testament, you know in Genesis 1, God creates this amazing place. In Genesis 2, he moves from creating the earth and all the stuff that had to do with the earth, the animals, all the pieces of it. He's creating this incredible place, and then in Genesis 2, he moves on and he's going to add a piece to it. And what he does in kind of a very simplified way is it says God goes down into the dirt and he forms a man. It all started with a dirt ball. He makes this shape that probably looked a little like, all right, it looked better. I know it did, but he makes this thing, and then he into this dirt object, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's hard for us to even wrap our minds around this. He breathes into this thing, into this something, and the something becomes someone. Now, here's what you got to know about where we ended up, where that picture we put up. Always remember this. God's movement into our world is always to move us from something to someone, always. And he does that by bringing what into us? His life. He took Adam and down in there's this thing, and he breathes into it, and Adam suddenly becomes alive. And Adam's identity and all of who Adam was is shaped by what? The breath of God, the life of God inside of him. That's what made Adam Adam. So you have God reaching down in Genesis 2 doing that, and he fills him with himself, his nature. So almost stamped into who Adam was just this nature of God into this dirt ball, and suddenly it's something. It's like it moves from something to someone. He's real, he's breathing, he's alive, and he carries the nature of God. Now then the second thing I want to think about is Adam's life. Like, what was that like? And our life is always in reference to a fallen world, but I want us to back up and try to imagine a life before that. Like Adam carried the nature of God inside of him. Now, here's where what I want us to think about. Why God does this is God made this beautiful planet, and what he wants is to fill this planet with his nature. That was his whole purpose of creating Adam. That's why he breathed into him his nature, so that Adam could not only receive it and contain his nature, but broadcast that into his whole world. That was always his strategy, to fill this beautiful place with his nature. That's his strategy for you. I hope you're thinking ahead, even as I talk about Genesis. I hope you're thinking to what happens in the book of Acts. But for now, let's just stay in Genesis. So Adam has this likeness. He has God's breath. He's God's agent. He's God's representative. He's God's person here on earth to take this nature that God breathed into him, that brought him to life, and to live that out in his world. That's what he was supposed to do. But remember where he was living. He's living in a garden, and in that garden, it's interesting. If you haven't read the account, it's interesting. God says there's this beautiful garden that he makes, and this garden is full of trees. And these trees produced delicious fruit, but there's two trees in particular that he singles out. And there's this one tree over here that's called the tree of life, and there's this other tree that's going to is called the tree of knowledge. And we're going to get to that in Genesis 3, because we'll go to Genesis 3 in just a moment. But Adam, because he has the nature of God stamped into him, which tree do you think he was drawn to? See, when you're filled with life, you're always going to be drawn initially to life. Now, there's Old Testament theologians and scholars who say probably regularly Adam went over to this tree. Think where he started. He was a dust ball. And he has God's nature. He has God's, that's what gives him his identity. That's what gives him purpose. That's what gives him value. Everything is shaped by that life inside him that was just into him from God, by God. He probably regularly went over to the tree of life and just said, oh, I'm going to eat deeply from here. That's how it started. That's where the story begins. A man made from dust who God breathes in, and his whole purpose is to receive that breath, to contain that breath and to broadcast that breath, because this is part one of filling the whole earth with his nature. And he's over here at the tree of life, just taking in this life. And then we go to this Genesis 3. Now, you know the story, and I want us to maybe think differently about the story. I don't know if so much think differently, but think maybe what this looked like. So you know how the story goes. And one day Eve's in the garden, and Adam's right with her. And then they're in the garden, they're doing whatever Adam and Eve did in gardens in those days. And then the serpent comes, the enemy comes. Boy, this is going to be key for some of us. Understand this. The enemy comes to disconnect them from life. Now, if you read, just so you know this, it's an interesting idea. We call this chapter the fall, or we call it the beginning of sin and all that. If you read the chapter in the English, any of your translations, I promise you this, you will not find the word sin in any of the English translations on Genesis 3. You know what happens if you read it in the Hebrew? You don't find sin. I'm going to circle back to that. It's really interesting. Because if I was writing about it, I'd say, this is where sin happened. So what actually happened? One day they're in the garden, and the serpent comes and says, hey, you guys have kind of been over around this tree. What about that tree? Have you ever... What about this? And Eve looked at it, and if you read the text, it says, she looked at it and says, that looks fantastic. It said the fruit looked like, all these trees. Look at this. It looked good, and it felt good. It felt like, man, maybe there's something here we missed. We've never tried this one. It's like being in a big city with all kinds of fantastic restaurants. And suddenly you realize, hey, I never tried this one. I want you to get this. It all starts to go downhill when they turn toward that. But in turning toward that tree, what did they have to turn away from? This one. And it's almost like they turn their backs here and they walk over and they start to look at it and say, I wonder why he said that. Now, you know how the story goes. Here's why I bring the turning away from and turning toward. How do we a lot of times define sin? On a behavior level. Is that actually where it starts, though? So they turn toward this tree and they eat from this tree. And something happens inside of them. Now, here's what you need to know. When they turned away from the life, and what did they turn toward? By the way, what was that tree called? Knowledge. They turn their back on life. They walk over here to knowledge and say, this is our new source. This will be our identity. This is going to now define who we are. What starts to happen, and here's why I think it's important that we really think through this on some level. If sin's just a behavior thing, then Jesus probably could have said it real simply and said, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. I come to clean up your behavior. Did you notice that's not what he said? It's not where he goes. He goes to the idea that in this disconnect, you said no to life, and you walked over and said, my new source of power is going to be knowledge. And the knowledge of what? This gets way complicated for some of us. The knowledge of evil, well, that makes a lot of sense. But do you understand that the knowledge of good disconnected them from life as much as the knowledge of evil did? It was this tree, this knowledge tree, that disconnected them from life. And what happens is they have a fundamental shift in their nature at that point. It's not just, and man, there's so many years I saw Genesis 3 this way. And I think it's bigger than this. God gave a rule. Adam and Eve broke the rule. God died on the cross so that they could be rule keepers. He went through that so we're rule keepers? No, it's much. The reason he came is much bigger than that. They turned here, and there's a shift in their nature, and now they've unplugged from life. Now, I generally, when I teach this, I have a fan out here, and I turn the fan on, and you know how it works. Some of you have seen this. The fan has an outside power source coming into it, and as long as the fan is anything electrical is connected to the power source, and you hit the on button, it operates in the design it was supposed to. It was designed to move air. That's what it does. Now, if you put a plug in the fan and plug the fan into itself, would it run? No, because it's lost its power source. See, essentially what happened in the move toward knowledge away from life is they lost their power source. They had no ability now to connect with life. And so in this place of knowledge, of going to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, what starts to happen is they have no ability, they're disconnected from life, and there's this thing inside them. They were wired for life. That's how they operated. It was disconnected. And so they try to find life over here, either on the side of evil or on the side of good. Watch this, because it's real easy to talk about finding life on the side of evil. Drugs, sex, go down the list. They also tried to find life on the side of good. I would say that most of us struggle with this branch way more than this branch. To kind of illustrate that, there's this story that Jesus tells in the New Testament. Interesting story. He talks about two guys praying. I don't even know if this is a story. It may have been an event. I haven't read this account recently. And he maybe just was highlighting something that he was watching. Remember when there's two guys at the temple praying? This guy's like, oh, I got it together. And what does he mention? Everything good. I tithe. Is tithing a bad thing? I pray, I tithe. He goes through this list of all kinds of good things, and when he's done praying, and this guy over here is just like, I'm a dirt bag. Which one stayed at that tree, and which one found life in that moment? And then we're disconnected. All I want to say about this, and then I want to go to the issue of the cross. Here's the best way I can describe this thing of being disconnected. Disconnected, by definition, in my mind, simply means this. We've lost our way because we bought into this. We bought into the wrong tree. Not only have we lost our way, we have no ability to even find our way back. It's the best way I can illustrate this, and this is so real in my life. If I take these off and lay them down, let me just say this before I do this. All of you guys are extraordinarily blurry, including those of you in the front row. this is all about that, not here. I have 20/20 here. That's why when I read, I pull my glasses off. So, because I don't have bifocals, because they make me feel old, I don't get bifocals. The guy recommended, and I said, nah, that's for old people. Not there yet. So guess what happens to me? Honestly, ask Joanne, I've had to order new glasses multiple times because I walk away. Now I got two problems. I don't have my glasses, so I can't see. Guess what else the problem is? I can't even see to find them. And so then I hope I don't step on. I've crunched them, I've stepped on them, because when I'm working on anything close, I'm forced to take them off. You know what the disconnect was? Adam and Eve, in that moment, and all of mankind turned their back on life, walked over here to the tree of knowledge and said, this is our new source of power, and didn't even have the ability to find their way back to life. How scary is that moment? See, sin's a lot bigger than a behavior problem. Sin is that moment when I realize I've lost life and I don't even know how to find it. So it's two things with disconnects: inability to return, and it's an inability to see and to perceive. Because I would just call that spiritual blindness. Because over here, when I'm eating fruit from the tree of knowledge, when I'm eating fruit from this tree, what I am essentially doing is I have closed myself from the abilities to see spiritually at all. All I can see is my natural world. So my decisions and all of it, my attempts to find life are all taken from a natural perspective. What feels good in the moment? I'm doing it. You see what happens? What's going to make me happy? I'm doing it now. And we can't even go back that way. So what did Jesus come to do? You see the problem? Let me just suggest three things. And man, this week, think about it. Because if you're here this morning, before I go to the solution, I just want to say this. If you're here this morning, here's the danger of this scenario. You know what we a lot of times tell people to do? What you need to do is make a decision from the branch of evil and flip over and start making good decisions. Now that sounds really good, doesn't it? Here's the problem. There's people out there making really good decisions that are completely disconnected from life, and I promise you that gets you nowhere. So what did Jesus come to do? I want you to think about this. Here's the beauty of this story. It's so cool. It's so cool. When I was dead, he moved toward me. He always starts the action because I don't even have the ability to turn toward him. And so when I was dead in my trespasses and sin, he comes and he takes again this dirt ball, this something, and he picks it up and he breathes life into it and says, I'm breathing into you my nature, all of who I am. Here's why I hope you're thinking Acts 3 or Acts. What is the whole point of the Holy Spirit? To get us out of this back to this tree of life. Because he didn't come here to make bad people behave well. He didn't come here to correct our behavior, first of all. He came here to make dead people alive. And you never make dead people alive by changing branches. Oh, you're doing bad things, you need to start doing good things. That'll come when you're filled with his nature. He moves toward us to once again reconnect us to life. And that's why that message came through over and over again. I came to give you life. I came to give you that. Because here you'll never have it. So his action is toward us. And think about the prophecies about that. We just came through the Christmas season, and so that was kind of the theme. His action is he's going to move into our world. He's going to come here to rescue us so that we can once again be reconnected and feeding from the tree of life. People walking in where? Darkness, right there. Knowledge of good, knowledge of evil. By the way, just how this one traps you sometimes. I've done ministry right over here. Right here. It was all about me. See, what this thing says is, it's all about me. You know how you know you're trapped in, if you get trapped in the ministry thing, if you're working for Jesus, you're here. If you're working from here, you're there. Because working for him is saying, I'm in charge of this. I'm going to exert my effort and my talents for your kingdom. Working from him is saying, Jesus, just fill me up with you, because I'm here to receive, to contain, and to broadcast your nature to the whole world. I'll work from you. And so the difference is, I don't take my plans, I take his agenda and say, God, where do you want me to broadcast for you today? This is about you. This isn't about what I want to do. This is so about you. But God makes that first move to reconcile us to himself. The second idea is this: God's motivation. I've said this, I'm just going to highlight it very quickly. The one, I have two things down for this. Motivation list could go much longer than this. The one was life. He came here to rescue and to give life to his kids, to us. The other one, his motivation was love. Do you understand how much you love someone when you send your son to a cross to rescue this group of people who won't even turn towards you? Love. The opposite of life is death, and know this, and here's where the spiritual warfare aspect of this: Satan will do anything he can to keep you at the tree of knowledge doing good things out of your own strength. As long as he can keep you there, he's going to keep you right there. You're not a threat to anything. But he comes to keep us disconnected and keep us turning and moving that direction toward life. But the opposite of life is death. Death to dreams. Death to, think about the death that we see around us. Death to marriages. Death to relationships. Death to so many things. He tries to keep us there. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is fear. Now understand this, that when he comes to rescue you, he brings He's coming to free you from the fear that's in your heart, the anxiety, the depression, all that stuff. Because that's all rooted right here. And he comes at the cost of his own son to rescue you. And then the last one is this. God's invitation. Let me talk about the human will as the way I see it. The way I understand the human will. There's the God part of the human will, the God aspect and the human aspect. I don't have time to kind of unpack the God aspect, so I'm so sorry. Because God needs to move toward us, and we've already said that, for us to even awaken to the idea that I can choose something, and then he invites us to choose. I promise you this, don't ever choose to move from this branch to that branch. Choose to change trees. He's not wanting to improve this. He's wanting you to in some ways, as you turn and move away from life, that you turn your back toward the tree of knowledge. And you move once again back and say, I'm going to receive your life and your fullness inside of me. That's the invitation he gives us. The difficulty of that is that becomes a moment of surrender. It's saying no to do my own things. It's saying no to my agenda. It's saying no to what makes sense in my world, because now I only have my natural mind. So what I do over here actually makes kind of natural sense. Saying no to that and saying, I'm going to turn again and move toward the tree of life, and I choose you. Now, isn't it ironic that if the goal of Jesus then in this moment is to move dead people to life, that his son needed to die and also be raised? See how powerful this week is? See the impact of this week? His goal is to move you from death to life. And whatever part of death is in you yet, because I think it's possible to move over here and still have those pieces in our hearts that we just need God to touch and to change and to heal and to restore and all of that. But remember what his big goal is. His big goal is to take us. His strategy is you. His goal is to inhabit the earth with people that carry his nature. That's what his goal is. And that's what we get to do. Zach and Lizanne, if you'd come, please. As we wrap this up, what I want you to think about then is just simply this. Have you positioned your life in a place where you can receive that breath of life from him? Receive it into you, contain it, like allow him to fill you to the entirety. Let me just do a little rabbit trail. I don't want us to get weird out on this, because I think Christianity can get weird out on this. When you talk about the infilling and the baptism of the Spirit, then what is God again doing? He's again taking his people and breathing into them his breath. And just, I'm going to fill you up with you so that you can actually go out now into your world and inhabit your world for me. Isn't that way cool? So however you work through that, this is a moment, and just take a minute and say, maybe it's a moment of surrender where you in your own heart say, I'm going to choose life again. I'm going to turn toward life. And I want to receive all of you, especially this week, as you think of the richness of what he did. He didn't come here to take bad people and make them good people. He came here to make dead people alive. And only his breath does that. Only it does. His breath does that. So allow him to breathe life into you in this moment. Maybe a new way, and just worship him with that.